and get started about the roles, I'm Hema Chittuuri. I've been with Facebook for a year. I work in Facebook for business organization, developing products for businesses that are on Facebook. Prior to this, I worked in several data-centric roles and have like 13 years of collective experience in different flavors of like data-centric roles. So jumping into the different roles that you usually hear about, some of the roles that you hear about are like data analyst, data scientist, insights analyst, or like a business intelligence analyst, and then business analyst and data engineer. Let me first talk about data analyst and data scientist, which are like two of the more popular roles. And also there tends to be some confusion between these two, whereas others are a little bit more clear. So data analysts and data scientists, both of them, they make sense out of data at a very high level. So you look at different, all the data that is available, identify trends, use statistical techniques to understand relevance of it, and also use some other techniques to like project how they are going to look so that you enable like decision making out of it. Where the difference comes is actually in data analyst family, you are just making use of the data that is available. Whereas in the data scientist family, you also tend to create the data that you're looking for and identify ways in which you can record and store this data. And this is a simplified way of putting, it's basically experimentation. Like for example, if I want to choose between A and B when I'm developing a product, if there's a data analyst, if product A and product B are available, he'll just like compare it and say, you know, product A performs better than product B. Whereas if you're a data scientist, you will actually like set up an experiment where you create an unbiased sample of accounts and split them between these two experiences, account for seasonality, do that comparison. So basically the data creation and experimentation component is what differentiates data analysts and data scientists. There's one more like minute flavor within data scientist family who work exclusively on like machine learning. So they are sometimes seen as like research scientists separately, or you know, you could just be a data analyst, a data scientist using ML models. So that's the high level difference between data analysts and data scientists. When you look at the skill set that is required, you need domain expertise for both the roles. You need computer science or like, you know, IT background or some of the skill sets that are needed out there on both sides. Statistical techniques needed on both sides. More on the data science role, scientist role compared to data analyst role. Next role is actually business intelligence or insights analyst. So insights analyst or business intelligence analyst is someone who tells a story from the data that is available, and also responsible for like ongoing reporting, making sure that leadership are able to like understand the current state of affairs of a product or a company or any business area that they are managing. So it's all about giving the right information, making decision-making simpler by telling the data story properly. Next, the fourth variant is business analyst. So business analyst is an interesting role. So they do some of the data analyst and data scientist functions, but where they differ is that you're also responsible for executing the strategy that you come up with. And a lot of times you're also responsible for some sort of like profit and loss. So you could be responsible for boosting the revenues or reducing the costs, and you are responsible right from finding that opportunities all the way up to like working with tech teams to get it executed and making sure that you are iterating over it. The whole end-to-end product is owned by business analysts. The last flavor is data engineers. Data engineers are those who are responsible for making sure that all the data is available. It's massaged into a form that is consumable by data analysts and data scientists. And they are extremely critical for machine learning kind of roles, where data engineers are responsible for extracting features from data. And features are what feed most of the machine learning models. So high level overview, I'll be happy to like dig deeper as we get into the Q&A session.
Okay, so if everybody could give a vote and to hear just what roles interest you the most as you hear about those or before even coming in today. And it's okay to have no idea and also put that in. Okay, we'll take about 5 more seconds. Okay, looks like data analyst gets the top with 14, and then closely behind is data scientist and business analyst. Okay, thank you for giving that introduction. So Hema, could you start us off with in terms of sharing your story and how you got to where you're at?
Sure. So like I said, I work for Facebook in Facebook for Business organization right now. And I'm not one of those people who had a... is the last scene. Oh, I'm sorry, my portal is reacting. Every time I say Facebook, it reacts. Anyway, I work in Facebook for Business organization. I'm not one of those people who had a clear view of like what they are going to do in like 5 years down the lane. I am always like interested in solving interesting problems. So I moved from role to role every time I found an interesting problem on the other side. I started out in business intelligence. So did the business intelligence analyst role, working for Microsoft as a contractor. Then I moved to a data analyst role. After that, I did my MBA, post my data analyst role, and then I joined as a business analyst manager, working for Capital One for almost 5 years. And now I have moved to the data scientist role. That's how like I have the experience between all these different things. But what's common between everything that I did so far is that I always like taking information-based decisions, and I love exploring problems through data. And I'm very intent on like, finding the right problems to solve for customers. And that's like the common thread connecting everything that I did so far.
Great, and I will go next. So I graduated from Georgetown in 2017, and my name is Joy Jackson, by the way. I forgot to introduce myself, but I was in the School of Foreign Service. I was a STEA major, and my focus was in really climate science and the geosciences more broadly. And I also, as a student, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. When I started school, I thought I was going to do, politics, public policy purely. I ended up, for fun, taking a climate science class and then changed my entire trajectory from there in my freshman year. So that is also a common thread in my own personal journey, is sort of finding different sources of inspiration and pursuing that in the context of, my experiences so far. So right after I graduated, I actually was working at the World Resources Institute, which is an environmental think tank, and I was helping them build out a couple of data platforms for housing climate data, with the purpose of being able to make that information and that data more accessible to decision makers. Climate projection data is very messy, very not easy to deal with. So the goal is to sort of increase the accessibility for decision makers who are using that information on a regular basis to decide on a variety of different issues, ranging from urban planning, transportation, and all of those sorts of things. And it was a really, I think, good combination of the academic background I had in government, but then also in environmental and earth science. And so after that, that was sort of planted the seed for me being interested in thinking about how decision makers use data to inform those decisions, and how that can be responsibly used or misused, and all of the complications that arise from that process. And so I ended up taking my first full-time job at a consulting firm called ICF. I think they're known more for like their energy and climate work, but they also had a huge sort of housing and community development practice, which is where I started working. And I specifically was working on post-disaster affordable housing and economic development program design and implementation, and doing some of the analysis to underpin the recommendations that we were making to state and local governments, which was, again, a really good sort of combination of that government background, but then also getting to apply some of the technical skills that I did learn through my coursework. And there were sort of pros and cons of doing that work in the consulting space. And ultimately that sort of pushed me to move more towards government, specifically local government, where you can kind of, play a role in making those decisions, but then also see how that plays out and how that impacts different residents and constituencies sort of in your backyard. So I ended up working in the office of the deputy mayor for planning and economic development, which is sort of like a branch of the mayor's office in Washington, D.C. I spent the last 2 years there doing a variety of different sort of data analysis, policy analysis roles, and specifically looking at like geospatial analysis as that relates to affordable housing, community development, and urban planning for Washington, D.C. I'm actually just started grad school a couple of weeks ago, so I am no longer employed as an analyst, but a big sort of reasoning for me going back to school was to sort of deepen my understanding and expand my toolkit a little bit of the types of analytical tools that I'm able to sort of, or that I will be able to use ideally if I go back into government work in a couple of years. So I'm in a technology and policy program at MIT, which is housed in the Institute for Data Systems in Society. So again, looking at that marriage of like data science, data analytics, and how that sort of has broader implication, or sorry, broader societal implications.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Katherine McDonald. I go by Katie. My name is Katherine, but I graduated Georgetown in 2020. So I guess my career journey is a lot shorter than some of the other panelists, so I may not have as much to say, but I majored in math and a minor in Spanish. But I always had this interest in healthcare and in technology, and I kind of wanted to work at the intersection of them. So that's kind of what led me to work at Change Healthcare, which is where I'm working right now. I've been there for about 7 months. I am a risk analyst, and I work in risk adjustment. So just like a brief overview that's like making sure health plans with like government sponsored insurance, like Medicare or Medicaid, get paid accurately for their members and the disease burden that they represent. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now. It's been a like pretty steep learning curve because I had an interest in healthcare but had no background because my major at Georgetown was math, and I took a lot of like comp sci classes and math classes and analytics classes. So that was something that was kind of difficult at first, but I have been able to learn a lot recently. So yeah, that's where I am right now, and I can probably go into more stuff later on, but I kind of have a short career journey, so that's it for now.
Cool. So I'll round this out. My name is Caroline Crandall. You'll also see Williams. I just recently got married, but so I graduated in 2015 from the SFS. I also was a CA major. I don't actually remember what my like focus was, but which makes me sound old. But so right after college, I started working at Deloitte in their federal practice, doing data analytics primarily with the State Department. And then while I was there, I also got my master's from Georgia Tech through their analytics program. And then eventually realized that I kind of wanted to move away from government work. I was mostly working on building models to look at like applicant data. And then a job at Washington Post opened up, and I started working there about 2.5 years ago, right after I finished up my master's. So at Washington Post, I work on the analytics. It's the audience development and insights team. So we basically focus on newsroom and subscription analytics. So understanding who our customer base is and how to get more subscribers basically, or more ad revenue. My focus is mostly on the newsroom. So I usually work on kind of special events or recurring events. So things like the election or Olympics was a big one for us. But yeah, I can go into more of that. But yeah, that's what I do now.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. So yes, for the next question, we'd love to just hear more about your day-to-day. And when you do that, if you could give a sample project. So, you know, Caroline, when you go to talk what specifically you did with the Olympics and what that looked like. But Hema, we'll start with you.
Sure. So starting with day-to-day, it involves a lot of conversations with our cross-functional partners. So as a data scientist, I'm responsible for a certain part of the organization. And that means that involves like working with technical project managers, project managers, business, PMM, product marketing managers, and data scientists and data engineers. So my day always like begins by understanding what is the biggest problem that we are trying to solve, and then trying to make sure that we have all the data infrastructure in place, and we have an analytical plan in place to analyze that problem, and also the execution step depending upon like what I find on that day. I'm trying to like find a good example. Like for example, if you have to take one of the calls could be that Facebook is losing revenue, ad revenue for a certain group of customers all of a sudden. So my plan would be like, number one, like how do I understand the problem? I would do some spot checks, and then I might actually like find that a certain business surface is not actually like working as expected. Like for example, people are on Android app are actually like not the revenue has dropped for Android app. So the next thing that I would do is like set up an experiment or look for sources available to make sure that I'm able to like pinpoint where exactly that is happening. Most of the times there will be data. Sometimes when there is no data, I would actually like set up something saying I'll come up with some hypothesis. So one of the hypotheses could be that people are posting more, and that makes them for some reason post ads less, because we replace the button where like they used to like set an ad with a button that actually like creates a story post like on Instagram. So I would actually like test that hypothesis by selecting a population and providing half of the population with like showing them a create ad button, and showing other half of population a create story button. And then I would actually like compare the output of it and find out that, okay, so people are actually like posting more, and that's why the ads are less, or vice versa, or they're not disconnected, and then come up with the next hypothesis. So come up with a mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive set of hypotheses of what's happening, test it, and make a recommendation for what we need to do to get the business back to normal. In other cases, it could actually be like finding ways in which we improve the experience of customers. It could be like going through the list of like reports we have or like bugs we have, and identifying what is the size of the problem so that I can take a call on whether we should build a product in that space or not. But if I have to like sum it up, it's about number one, finding what is the highest priority item, be it solving an issue or improving an experience, then developing hypothesis about what could be happening, testing that hypothesis in data if it is available, or creating that data through experimentation, and then advising technology teams and business on what is the right next step forward to fix that issue or like create that experience.
And so I'll speak to, I guess, my previous role, because my day-to-day currently looks a lot like yours, which is just homework and research. But when I was working at DEMPED, so it's the acronym for the office that I was in, I was part of a small sort of in-house shop, sort of like a data analytics shop, where we were sort of tasked with, one, handling requests that came not only from within our agency, different departments within our agency. So we sort of oversaw the city's, or oversee the city's real estate development, affordable housing development, looking at business development, a little bit of work on like, how do we expand the tax base, like those sorts of questions. So if a real estate project manager, has a project that they're working on, and they want to understand like the number of jobs that could potentially be created from that development, they would come to us, and we would sort of put our heads together and try to develop a methodology, given the data that we had access to best estimate, what the impact of a real estate project would be, what the impact of a new tax incentive would be, or a new grant program for small businesses in DC. So that's sort of broadly like a lot of the mechanics of what we did, was taking in data requests and requests for analyses, and then bringing them to life, hopefully. Some cases that wasn't always possible, because I don't know if any of you have worked with government data. It can be like really messy, incomplete, not the best quality. So you do have to get a little bit creative on, when you're designing a particular approach, like, should we be using this information? Is there a better source? You know, thinking it through kind of how to best get at what the questions, or the fundamental questions you're asking are. And so that was, I think, a lot of the fun part of the job, was like having to like think through very critically about some of these issues in order to develop the best proposals and make sure that, you know, the decision makers who, you know, make the final call have all the information that, you know, at their disposal to make an informed decision. And so there was, I guess, kind of two buckets of projects. There was a lot of ad hoc work, like what I was just talking about, and then there were a few standing projects that we would work on. So we created sort of a database of all of the affordable housing in the district that's been produced in the last, I don't know, approaching a decade now. And there's a big sort of mayoral priority. Obviously, housing is very expensive in DC. So how do we build more affordable housing? We were tasked with tracking that. And we built out a process for collecting that information in conjunction with some of our partner agencies. And then also we built out a formal dashboard. So that's publicly facing. I can drop it in the chat if that's helpful. That shows our progress to date on these goals. So a lot of what our work was doing was also operationalizing what the mayor's priorities were, and making sure that we were evaluating progress against those goals properly. And then, so that there's ad hoc projects, longer term projects like the one I just mentioned, and then there were sort of like special projects that came up. Obviously, with the pandemic and us being sort of the agency in charge of economic development in the district, it was very chaotic last year. A lot of business relief, a lot of just like trying to figure out what's happening, talking to stakeholders, developing sort of an economic recovery framework to guide DC forward past COVID, hopefully, and beyond. So that was one really interesting project that obviously was not the norm. And then there were also opportunities for us to engage with research organizations like the Urban Institute and Brookings if we had particular research questions that we felt we didn't have the capacity to handle in-house. Our sort of unit was in charge of managing those, I guess, contractors in this case, to scope out an analysis, provide them with data if necessary, and just make sure that, you know, the approach they settle on is also in line with what we're thinking of as the key questions. And then, again, some random fun projects. We got to work on the like DC's World Cup bid. So FIFA came to us and they were like, we have all these questions and we need answers on like, you know, what is your capacity to like host people? Like, what does your hotel market look like, your real estate market? How might this impact homelessness and housing in the short term? And so we got to do a lot of really fun, fast-paced projects like that, where you got the request and the turnaround time was really fast, but you kind of had to think quickly on your feet to figure out, you know, how best to answer those questions.
Okay. So like I said before, I'm on a team that focuses on Medicare Advantage, and we work with Medicare Advantage plans, which is basically like these plans get money from the government. They get monthly payments based on how sick their members are and based on their characteristics. So we work with these like private insurance companies, and we use their member data and their claims data to help kind of predict the expected cost of them to provide health coverage for their enrollees, so that they can basically properly financially plan for their year. So like when a member goes to the doctor and they get like a chronic disease and they document it, it's not always documented correctly, or it's not always documented. So that's kind of where my team comes in, and we are there to help the plans make sure that these diagnosis codes are getting properly documented so that the government sees how sick these members are. So we work a lot with submissions data, and I've been learning a lot about kind of the flow of customer data throughout the submissions process. It's a lot of analytical reporting, so either creating processes or reports requested by clients to provide insight into how they can resolve these like system errors. So it's a lot of SQL database querying. Sometimes it's predictive analysis, but basically, like I said, we're there to make sure that these members are being covered and paid for. So that involves a lot of like chasing down charts, making sure that they're properly documented, getting members to see their doctor, because a lot of members don't see their doctor. Yeah, but that's kind of what I do. One pretty cool, I guess not really that cool, but one project that I recently worked on was I just kind of went through the whole entire, this plans database, and I was able to pick out like exactly like which members have not seen that have not had their like annual wellness check yet, and predict how much when these members do go to their annual wellness visit, how much like what categories and what diagnosis codes will be captured from that, and then how much their risk score, which the risk score is basically how sick a member is. So the higher the risk score, the sicker a member is. The lower the risk score, the more well a member is. So if a member did not go to their annual wellness visit and they've had a bunch of like chronic categories in the past, and they go to this annual wellness visit, their risk score is definitely going to boost up and like basically will equip the plan to better financially plan for the money that they'll be getting from CMS, which is the government service.
Cool. So my day-to-day, so starting off, I make sure that all of my reports have run correctly, because I'm sure a lot of you know that can just mess your whole day up. So as you can imagine, the Washington Post site's really, really big. So there's obviously a lot of tracking on the back end, so that we can understand, what are people clicking on, what articles are being read, things like that. So there's a report out there almost for every single piece of the site. So that's a big part of my day, is kind of making sure no fires are happening. All of our data's come in from the day before, all of our subscription data's in, so that we can, get the execs ready for the 9 a.m. meeting of like, all right, this is where we're at. After that, I would say my day is mostly split between kind of ad hoc reporting and longer term projects. Ad hoc reporting can be things like advertising asking us for data on a specific section, because they're going to have a pitch for a new client, and they want to know how many impressions they might be expected to get. A lot of new products are also being launched constantly on the Washington Post site, so that we can generate subscribers, generate readers. So a lot of my day is focused on making sure tracking is implemented correctly on those, and then kind of looking maybe historically at like how sections that were similar have done, what can we expect out of these new products, and like kind of defining metrics of success of like, all right, how many page views or how many new subscribers is like worthwhile for us to put money into a new section that's being released, or a new product or things like that. So I also help out a lot with like internal products. So Washington Post has a lot of like internal products that kind of monitor authors and how different authors are doing, and different content, how that's doing. And so that directly informs kind of the strategy of the Washington Post site of like, what should we be promoting? What should we be writing more of? Things like that. So when it comes to like longer term projects, so for example, with the Olympics, obviously there's a lot that goes into like the Olympics as a whole for the Washington Post. It means the launch of a new site section, which has tons of articles, tons of, unique products. So like guide pages, FAQs, little like men like kicking footballs and stuff, that like all of those designs and all of that stuff, and all those strategy and planning meetings usually we're involved in, to make sure that whatever's happened previously, so like the last Olympics, what worked well, what didn't work well, what should we be looking to try and do. So then after kind of helping develop the strategy plan with that and kind of defining the strategy for success, usually we kind of monitor as things are going, because with an event like the Olympics, we can make changes as things are happening. On election night, probably not. You just kind of got to go with the flow. And if it's messed up, you're like, oops, hopefully it won't be next 4 years. But then at the end, usually there's like a big wrap up, big strategy meeting where we kind of look at what worked well, what didn't work well, what should we do for the next time, and like, did we succeed? So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for really diving into some sample projects that really helped a lot. So a few of you have worked in consulting and banking, and now is the time. It's season, and students are wondering, I'm interested in data. Like, should I just go the consulting route? So I'm wondering if you could share how your work has been similar or different to your work as a consultant. So Caroline and Hema specifically, and maybe Joy too, if you could share more about that. So let's start with Hema, then Caroline, and then Joy, if you want to jump in, that'd be great too.
Sure. Can you please repeat the question?
Can you share how your work right now at Facebook, that environment too, is similar or different than your work at a consulting, and I think you worked at Capital One as well?
Sure. The biggest difference is the magnitude of the responsibility that you have in terms of what you could do with the data, and also like access to data. If you're a consultant, right, like you get data on need-to-know basis. You get data very specific to like what you're working on and nothing beyond that. And all you could do is like get some insight and share it with someone else and hope that they would actually like work on it. When I worked for Capital One Bank directly and not as a consultant, then I had like access to like a wider range of data. And I had like full flexibility of like understanding that data, running several models on it, and also being able to like, guide the direction of the product, and also be there to like see the results. And in consulting, almost all the times you can just give the direction and then you're done. Someone else, they could do something about it or they may not do it. Whereas here you are there for the execution portion. You make sure that you're actually like things are working, and also you verify the results. With Facebook, there is a ton of data, and the biggest difference between like Capital One and Facebook is, number one, the amount of data that you have and the impact of the decisions that you make is phenomenally different between Capital One and Facebook. With Facebook, one tiny change would mean like you're impacting tens of millions of customers. And in Capital One, that's not the case. Like the entire customer base is like 70 million. So you're working on smaller pockets of those customers. The second thing is the volume of the data that you work with. It's phenomenally different, and it needs completely different techniques. If you're a consultant, you're working with like smaller databases, say millions of rows. If you're in a financial services company, Capital One prides itself on being very data centric, and even over there, I would the biggest queries that I would run would probably be a couple of tens of millions, and maybe on the extreme end, hundreds of millions. Whereas in Facebook, like you are, I'm routinely like running queries that work on like tens of billions of data. So you're using totally different techniques. And another major difference between consulting, banking and Facebook is that there are a lot of things that you're not supposed to do when you're working in a sector that is like tightly regulated. For example, if you're working in healthcare, you can't be using a person's age to determine like how much money that they're going to get. Or you can't be using a person's race or physical location within the country to determine what sort of experience that they get in banking or like a credit limit. Whereas on Facebook, you don't have such restrictions. You are able to like use almost all the data that is available so that you can customize the experience for like different groups of customers. And that would also mean that you have a lot more freedom in coming up with like different solutions without having to actually like worry about whether they are legal or illegal to begin with. So to summarize it, number one, the volume of data that you work increases between being a consultant to working for a company that has like smaller data and working for a larger global company like Facebook. Number two, the amount of responsibility that you have also like progressively increases. The impact that you generate also like progressively increases. And one thing that is really unique about Facebook is that every other person you meet is actually a customer. So there is this continuous feedback loop where you are hearing directly from your customers about the changes that you have done and how they are impacting it. And you can always like take that back to like improve your products on a daily basis.
Cool. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said. I'd start by saying that I don't actually think that consulting or banking is a bad way to start out your career. I think there's a lot of pros to it. Like one, if you're not really sure what you want to do, I think it's a great place to start out. I also think the amount of training that they'll give you is like unparalleled until you get your master's. So, you know, if you're kind of on the fence, I'm like, I don't think any of us are here to say that it's like a bad route. I just think it's different. And I think for me, especially like at Washington Post, there's actually no one on my team that's directly out of college. So I think getting into these analytics roles and more specific analytics roles, it might be a little bit more difficult to do that if you're an undergrad. So just to keep that in mind. I would say that, you know, my job at Washington Post now compared to Deloitte is a lot more fast paced. I think that's because it has a lot to do more with money. So how much money are we making right now? How much money are we losing right now? Whereas at Deloitte, you know, they're getting paid no matter what. So that's a big thing. I agree with what you said as well about the access to data. There's definitely a lot more access because they basically want to give you anything you need to make them more successful. So that's really awesome because they're willing to do a lot more risky things. So like a lot more experimentation to see what works and what doesn't work. Whereas I feel like with consulting, it was a lot more kind of like in a box of like, you know, this is what you can do and shouldn't really deviate too much from that because that's not what they're paying you for. So yeah, I think that's kind of what I'll say about that.
I totally agree on like, you know, consulting being a great place, especially if you're beginning the career. And like Caroline mentioned, one huge advantage is that you're always moving between like n number of projects.
Sure. Yep.
So you get to experience all those flavors. And if you don't like a project or if you think the role is not strategic enough or the industry that you're working on is not great, just wait a couple of months and it will be gone. Whereas that's not the case. Once you start with a company, you sometimes have to like balance between doing what you find as interesting and also doing things that are value add to the company itself. And you will just learn to like do that as you progress, and consulting is a great place to like begin that.
Yeah, and I kind of want to reiterate on some of the points that Hima and Caroline touched on. One, as like being a public sector consultant, and then being on the other side of that, where, you know, we get to tell the consultant what to do. There are some interesting dynamics there, but one, reiterating that data access, at least on the government side, is also much better because, you know, you have access to a lot of information, and a lot of that you would not share under very many circumstances at all, but you can use that to derive some interesting insights that then goes into, feeds into the policymaking process, which I thought was, you know, super valuable, super interesting to see. You just kind of get insight into some of the dynamics that you wouldn't otherwise, you know, be privy to either as a consultant or just as like a resident of any jurisdiction. And then I guess regarding the sort of role you play as a consultant, something that I found to be kind of frustrating during my time in my first job was that you were so confined to like whatever it was the client wanted you to do. And so there wasn't, at least on the projects that I was working on, there wasn't a whole lot of sort of space to like get into a more creative mindset about how you would tackle the problem. In some instances, the client will just, they have what they want to do and they can't do it, and you're here to do that task. And so that is what you do, versus being on the client side. You do get to have that creativity when you're scoping out the problem. You get to figure out what the questions are. You can design an approach, or you can leave that up to the consultant. And so that was, I think, more interesting for me personally. And then I guess to Hima's point too, a big part of my first job was doing business development. I did not enjoy working on proposals and helping to win work. So that was another sort of thing that kind of pushed me away from that. But I also would agree with Caroline's point that I think consulting is sort of a great entry point into the workforce because you learn so many skills. You get to try out a lot of different fields and just like ways of thinking. You get to work with a lot of different types of people, which I think is also super helpful down the line. So definitely agree with the points that were raised earlier.
Thank you all. It's very helpful to hear. The next question is about just technical skills, like how students can make them themselves more attractive for these types of jobs. And Katherine, I'd like to start with you this time. You know, I know as a math major, you we're not always sure about what careers you could apply for, and you had some questions around that. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that and just the technical skills that you think could be really helpful for students to gain.
Yeah, this was something that I definitely struggled with while like going through the application process and the recruiting process. Like I knew that I majored in math and that I did well in school, but I kind of just felt like something inside me. Like I know all these stuff, but I just feel like I don't, like, compared to some of the other math majors. But really, I think what helped me like just get through this whole entire process was writing down everything that I knew and talking about projects and accomplishments. And something that helped me kind of organize all that was that I made a website for myself. You can do it through like Squarespace or Wix. Make it also like super personal, so it's even more attractive to the company. Like sometimes, at least for myself, I took this class at Georgetown. It's called Statistical Learning and Data Science, and that was something that definitely like influenced like my interests in like my career path. And that was in a class, but I couldn't really put it on my resume because it wasn't an internship. It wasn't like, it was just didn't really fit in it. So, but it's something that I really wanted to talk about in my interview process, and I wanted them to know about me. So like my solution was create a website and just like put anything on it that you're proud of, like your skills, your projects, your accomplishments, anything. And another thing that I was going to say is I think something that really helped me throughout my interviews was two things. Was they want someone, if you're going for a data analyst role, they want someone who not only has the technical skills, but can communicate those technical skills with people who are non-technical. And that is something huge that I almost heard in every single one of my interview processes. Like, we need someone that does this and does that. So you have to be able to not only say, I know SQL, but explain why you knew SQL, explain a project you've done with SQL. Just don't, it's not enough to just have it on your resume. You have to be able to talk about it. What's on the resume is kind of just like getting you through the door, and you need to do the rest. Like, you have to make sure that you actually have worked with it and can tell a story about it. And that's the other thing, storytelling. People love, like, people in the data field love the term storytelling. So that kind of just goes with like communication with non-technical roles. Like, you want to be able to like explain what is going on to someone who doesn't have the skills that you have.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so let's just combine the question for the rest of you. And Hema, if you could start us off again, just any technical skills that you look for entry-level grads, and any interviewing tips, and we'll just combine those two questions. And then for the rest of you on this call, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
So Katherine covered most of the things that we look at when we are, especially at entry level. In general, like they're looking for two sets of skills, right? Like the first one is the analytical skills, making sure that you can approach a problem in a structured fashion, understand it, analyze it, and then be able to like make identify a trend or find a solution for a problem. It's all about like how you think structured and how you communicate that thoughts and work with like cross-functional partners. So that's the first skill. The second one is the technical skills part. Technical skills vary a lot depending upon the role and the position, you know, whether it is entry level or a senior level position. But what's absolutely needed is SQL. So if you don't know SQL and you're interested in data analysis role, this is the time to, you know, start working on that SQL skills. You're basically illiterate in the data world if you can't like get the data. So SQL is absolutely essential to get that. So SQL I would rank as absolutely necessary, almost like a qualifier before you get a job. And then the differentiators are actually, you know, something like Python, so that you can process like larger amounts of data, or machine learning, so that you can work with, you know, non-numeric data, like text data or, you know, classification models, all that. And a little bit of visualization tools so that you can develop some basic dashboards and reports, you know, on an ongoing basis. But again, reiterating that SQL is absolutely essential for almost all of these roles. And most companies would actually like test for it using like basic SQL. There are a couple of tools for folks with a non-technical background to like learn it. I usually like find learning by, you know, reading some text or like blogs very boring. I like learning by doing. And I especially love it if it is gamified. So there are a couple of options where like, learning SQL is gamified. So first one is HackerRank. It's a site where you can sign up and you don't need to have any environment set up on your computers. You can just go there. There are a lot of SQL problems and you can try to like solve it and run it right there. And then it shows like, whether you did it right or you did it wrong. And then there is another platform called LeetCode, LeetCode, LeetCode. So LeetCode also like gamifies this. You get points by solving these problems, and then you keep progressing to a next level. Companies like Capital One actually require a hacker rank before you're granted even an interview. So they use that as a elimination part before they decide to spend time on you. So working on some of these platforms, getting your SQL right would be a good place to begin.
Great. Caroline or Joy, do you have anything more you want to add? No. Okay. How about we'll have you two start. Caroline, we'll have you start with this one. Dylan has a question. In what ways does obtaining a master's degree in data science or data analytics increase opportunities available within the field of data analytics? So Caroline, if you could start, and then Joy, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think a big reason behind why I chose to get a master's was because I felt like it was gonna propel me in my career, was gonna open up opportunities for me to get promoted more. I feel like, the higher up you get in a company as well, the more people you're gonna be around that do have additional degrees. So I felt like it also was a good opportunity for me to kind of solidify a lot of my coding skills. So yeah, I mean, I think it's not a necessary thing because there were a lot of partners at Deloitte that didn't have master's degrees or MBAs. But I definitely think it's a pretty attractive thing for employers or even your current job to have that.
And I would also agree. I also do think that the type of degree that you end up pursuing for graduate school also depends highly on kind of what your own personal goals are, right? Like what you're wanting to do moving forward professionally. For me, I really like doing research. I think that's, potentially a career path I want to go down, but I don't want to do academic research. So I like doing policy research. It's very difficult to get a job working in policy evaluation or program evaluation or any sort of more sort of technical approach to thinking about policy and quantifying impacts and things like that without a master's degree. And that's just sort of an unfortunate state of the field. It seems like more and more for those types of jobs, that is sort of a main entry point, and that's held, at least, working on housing work. Prior to that, when I was doing climate related research, almost everyone that I knew that I was colleagues with back then all went back and got, masters. It seems to be in some cases, in some fields, a prerequisite for advancement. So that is, I think, something to keep in mind, but it also depends highly what your own personal goals are. So yes, I eventually would like to explore a research career path, but also I felt like, having worked a few years, there were definite gaps in my knowledge, and grad school can be a really good way to sort of bridge the things you started to learn when you were an undergrad. And, once you start working, you can kind of see the need for other skills. And then that kind of enhances your own value add as, whatever your desired role is. So for me, I knew there were different approaches. I'm also trying to get back more into climate environmental space. And so there are more advanced approaches that I need to learn now so that I'm able to sort of succeed if that is the path that I choose to take as well.
Thank you. So it sounds like for both of you, it will definitely be helpful in pursuing, maybe some promotions, talking to some folks already at the industry, or maybe even pivot to a new area. What about for students? I think there is a one-year program at Georgetown in analytics. Would it be beneficial or advantageous for them to do that one-year program and have that master's under their belt before applying, or does that not matter? What do you think about going right away to a data program? Anybody willing to answer that?
I think it's mainly just about, do you want to keep doing school or do you need a break? That's how I look at it. I mean, if you're going to get a master's and you have the capacity after graduating after 4 years of college and you think you can do it, then I don't think there's too much harm. A lot of people I know, when I went to my job at Deloitte, they already had gotten 1 year master's in statistics. That was really common. So yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, this may just be specific to my company, but I have been here for about 7 or 8 months, and I feel like I have learned more about data analytics here than I have at Georgetown entirely. That's not because Georgetown was a bad school, it's just because I focused on math there and not analytics. So I think, honestly, like having a master's program, I've never got my master's degree anywhere, so I don't know. But I do know from experience that like actually having a job in analytics and getting hands-on experience is really helpful. And I think it's the best way to learn, in my personal opinion. Others, I know it's like definitely depends on the person, but I think you can't go wrong.
I agree 100% with what Katherine said. Nothing replaces actual practical knowledge, and job is a really easy place to like get that. But at the same time, we tend to use the same set of tools repeatedly, and we end up using the same set of tools to solve different kind of problems. And as they say, once you have a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And it's not always the case. So having a master's degree would mean that you'll have a wider set of tools. So when you're looking at a problem, your knowledge gaps are much lesser, and the solution is like more complete. And in general, if I'm looking at a resume, I'm not looking to see whether the program is 1 year or 2 years. I just know that they have some formal education over there, and that always ends up tilting scales in their favor compared to like an applicant with completely no data analysis experience or like data analysis coursework.